Hey folks, thanks for checking out Reigniting Liberty. I'm Deneen Borelli and Dr. Tom Borelli is in the house, bringing you the truth in black and white. We've got someone else in the house joining us as well. But before we get to that, I just want to say that today's show is going to be a little different because we're not going to get into the politics of the day, which could be a bit much, even for the Borellis. But having said that, what we would like to do is get into other issues and topics that would be of interest to our viewers and our listeners. And in this case, it's in regards to medicine and other things that could be of importance to you and your family. But as always, we're going to cut through the clutter, cut through the truth, get to the truth in black and white. So what we want to do is welcome our great guest today. It's Dr. Richard Westreich, and he is a double board certified plastic surgeon, facial plastic surgeon in New York City. Welcome to Reigniting Liberty, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be on.
Now, before we get started, I want you to take a good look at Tom. Is there any hope for him? I'll pay anything. What do you think?
There's always hope. There's always hope.
Thank you, Doc. That's what we need. Bail me out.
That's a safe out. I like that. Well, we want to discuss the issues that are going on within the field of medicine. Physicians, you have a private practice as a plastic surgeon. Now, most people don't necessarily see what you do as a small business per se. I mean, there is a lot involved, not just with your patients, but a lot of behind the scenes things. And one of the things we wanted to get into is like the cost that are incurred on your end. I mean, we know there's the rent, there's staff, there's utilities, there's supplies, and also the hassle of managing people as well. But your initial comments in terms of the challenges that you face in running a small business.
Well, I don't think it's unlike any other type of small business. It just happens to be focused on healthcare. Ultimately, every business has costs, and depending on where you are, those costs are going to be very different. As you mentioned, we have rent. We have staff, we have our own insurance, we have supplies, I have medical malpractice. When you're involved in insurance, there's a cost of even doing the billing of the insurance to get paid. So all those things do add up to, what we traditionally call overhead. And ultimately, you try to create a practice that can sustain the overhead as a profitable entity because, you are doing this as work, even though it's an altruistic endeavor at heart. You're doing this, to support your family. So it's a challenge. And I would say in medical school, they don't really teach you anything about running a small business. There's literally no education in that area. And so you kind of have to just figure it out. And, I'm 17, 18 years into practice, and I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah, truth be told, Doctor, my original plan in life was to be a veterinarian. I was only a B+ student. And back in the day, I think even today, that's certainly not enough to get into vet school. But looking back now, and it's not sour grapes, trust me, I'm looking at it and say, gee, I'm glad that didn't work out because it's a small business. Rather than just doing the medical treatment, you have staff and, a veterinarian has to buy equipment, the receptionist, someone else, 24 hours to watch the dogs or cats or whatever other animal at night in the facility if they're boarding. And it just seemed like it was so much of a small business that a lot of effort goes to the business side rather than the medical side. Do you have challenges trying to balance those aspects, the business versus the medical aspect?
I mean, certainly it's a daily challenge. I mean, fortunately, I have enough of a mature practice that a lot of things are in place, and I do have a reasonable number of things outsourced so that I don't have to necessarily take care of it. But ultimately, I do have to be the CEO of this practice in addition to, providing the medical care. And, like, for example, right now, I think we're starting to feel, the beginning of the recession. And certainly at least a change from the COVID type environment that we were practicing in that was actually very beneficial to physicians. And so it's sort of, we're getting a correction and then we're getting a second correction. And so I'm having to, try to figure out how to navigate, that pivot as a small business person. It has nothing to do with providing medical care, but I do have to do it with an eye towards making sure that my patients will still get the level of service that I want them to have as coming to my office.
And I guess another challenge is Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the federal government wants to reduce reimbursement to physicians. So on one hand, as you just mentioned, inflation is going to be a challenge and no doubt squeezing part of your small business margin. But then on top of that, Medicare is planning to reduce payments to physicians. So, even beyond, just your practice, how is the Medicare reduction in reimbursement going to affect the small business doctor office?
Well, I think they're proposing a 4% reduction. And most of the commercial insurance carriers, your Empires, your Aetnas, your Cignas, they do a multiple of Medicare. And so that means that 4% could be a 5% reduction in Cigna or Aetna, or a 4% reduction in kind. And basically, if you look at, you have overhead, let's say your overhead is 50%, right? That 4% reduction for doing the same amount of work basically results in an 8% reduction in your salary. Because the overhead's not going down. And I think when you compound that with the inflation pressures and all the other pressures that are going on right now, I think it's very, very hard for a lot of physician practices to kind of make ends meet. And they're going to be obligated to make some changes, and I don't think that those changes tend to be very positive for patient experience and for healthcare in general. But they threaten this out every year, and sometimes they do a little less. So we're gonna stay optimistic that they'll cut that 4% down a little bit.
Well, that's really interesting because Denise and I love interviewing people. We actually love learning, and we hope to educate our listeners and viewers. But this is the first time I ever heard that Medicare, that the insurance companies essentially pile on to what the government take their lead. I didn't realize that. So thank you for that little tidbit of information.
You're very welcome.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask, I've noticed a lot of doctors are going under the umbrella, so to speak, like they're joining hospitals, or they're kind of combining their practices with bigger organizations. I'm sure the insurance aspect probably plays a role in that. If you could just talk to us about that.
Absolutely. And I think it's certainly in areas like New York where the cost of providing the care is so much higher, just because of the rent and the salaries that you have to provide people. I've had a lot of colleagues, group practices, go under the umbrella of the hospitals, and I think it was just because they were finding it harder and harder to kind of create the same environment, and there was just pressure being squeezed on both sides. And the thing is that's really interesting, so this may be something else that you're not aware of, is that the insurance company has a different contract with every provider. And the bigger you are, the more you can negotiate a better contract. So, while I might get 140% of Medicare as a single practitioner, the hospital may have its own contract where they're getting 170%, 200%. And so going under the umbrella of the hospital then allows them to do your billing, and therefore you're doing the same work, but the insurance company is paying the hospital significantly more, and so it helps to support your practice revenue. And I think that's a big driver. That plus obviously liability and handling of employees, all that's become really, really complicated the last couple of years. Like I just about 2 years ago joined with an EPO to manage my employees, which is employee professional organization. So my employees don't actually even work for me anymore. I lease them from this EPO that provides all of the HR and other kind of benefit services. And that was a really great thing for me. So I think going under a hospital kind of feels like that.
That's really interesting as well. So when a physician moves into a group, what's the impact on their practice, so to speak? Do they lose any flexibility? Is there an upside? Is there a downside? And what about the patient? Same question. When you see a physician in a group, is there an upside for the patient or a downside for the patient?
Well, I think the upside for the physician is a little bit more security, and maybe in a group you're not going to have as many redundancies, so your costs are going to go down because there are certain type of positions that you could share with the other providers. You do lose flexibility, you do lose your autonomy, and depending on how business forward you are, that may not be something that you're particularly interested in doing. Like, I'm very interested in having my own business, and that's why I'm sustaining myself in this way. I think for patients, it's again a good and a bad, right? So the doctor is still going to be available. You're still going to be able to see your doctor. You may not have kind of the mom and pop feel when you call to make an appointment, so it might be a little bit less personal. And then, so that's a downside. And then on the upside, I do think that when you're in a group practice, there's a lot of cross coverage. So let's say you really need to see somebody, and let's say your doctor's a surgeon, but he's in surgery, there'll be another person in the group who'd be able to step in. And so I do think that there's value. I don't think it's a negative value to the patients in general, other than just, maybe not knowing all the secretaries and all the medical assistants and all the other people on staff that you're interacting with.
A similar question with the Medicare reimbursement. If, for say, Medicare does raise, the reduce reimbursement, whatever, by 4%, and then insurance companies match or go higher, as you mentioned, what's the impact on a physician's ability to care for their patients, as well as what's the impact on the patient?
Well, I think there's not really any positive impacts that I can come up with this scenario for you. And this has been going on for many years. They've been slowly reducing payments to physicians for many years. And I don't think anybody's shocked to recognize that the time they spent with the doctor now in 2022 compared to the time they spent with the doctor in 2012 is significantly less. So the more they cut, the more the doctor tries to see more patients. That doctor might be completely maxed out in terms of how many patients. So then in that scenario, you're going to think about, bringing in a physician extender, a nurse, a PA, somebody else to see the patients where you're providing more oversight. So it may create a distancing. There may be more visits where you're not actually able to see the physician specifically. And I don't think that that's what a lot of patients necessarily want. They may make some staff cuts, and so then there's going to be less people available to help you. And I think that those are the type of things that can happen. And ultimately, as a physician, I am constantly required to take these courses on physician burnout as part of my malpractice renewal every year. They have courses that you have to take. And there's a lot of burnout in the profession because the physician doesn't want to spend less time with their patients, right? Part of the reason you went into this was because you liked people and you liked spending that time with them. And so, you sort of lose your own personal sense of satisfaction if you're just kind of running a mill and trying to see as many patients as possible. And so burnout is a big issue amongst physicians, and that generally manifests in somebody who's maybe a little bit less invested in what they're doing, which is not great.
Yeah, the other thing I've noticed is that some physicians have actually dropped taking Medicare. Mm-hmm. Me being of that age, at least one of my doctors has dropped taking Medicare. So I guess that's its own kind of natural selection, where some of the top doctors may just opt out and just charge the patient directly.
Yeah, and I don't think they necessarily want to do that. It's just I don't think that the insurance model for a lot of practices is very sustainable. I happen to be in an area where there's a lot of self-pay, and so I am insulated from that. But even being insulated from that, partly, like, I still feel every year my practice has grown every year that I've been in practice, and every year the insurance amount has gone down. So I'm busier, but the amount that I make from insurance is less, and so I have to supplement that somehow. Unfortunately, I'm in a particular industry where I can, but like your pediatrician doesn't have that luxury, right? So then they start trying to do things like doing certain tests in-house so that they can do the blood work and bill for that service, and that's what a lot of them have been doing over the last 10, 20 years. But again, I think there's only so many ancillary services that you can bring into your office, and I think people are kind of like maxed out in terms of what they can do in that regard. So it's a little scary.
No, sure. Everything is scary these days, especially. During the virus, the pandemic, was there an uptick in terms of patients coming in? Because I have this visual of people being able to put the mask on. They could cover up whatever procedures or whatever they may have had done. Did you significantly notice there was some sort of uptick with patients coming in?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was so pervasive that they even gave it a name. They were calling it the Zoom boom. I remember doing interviews about the Zoom boom and the type of things that people were doing. And, I would say my practice was probably up 40% from, ignore 2020, compared to 2019. 2021 was 40% higher than 2019. And that was for a variety of factors. But yes, people weren't traveling. They were working from home. They had more flexibility. They could wear a mask. And all of those factors just made for a lot of people being interested in doing plastic surgery, which is my area. But I do think the medical industry in general, once we got out of the first 6 months, had a lot of activity. First of all, you were doing the backup from the 6 months where it was all shut down. But I think that those elements, like if you had an elective procedure like a torn rotator cuff or some orthopedic procedure, it was really easy for you to get that done. And so I think a lot of practices had an increase. And now that we are kind of coming out of the pandemic in certain ways, and like in New York, a lot of people are going back to the office. So that's creating scheduling problems that we haven't had. People aren't able to take that week off because they just went back to work. And I think the industry in general is having a slowdown. Probably not a full correction, but if I was up 40%, I think I'm going to be down 20% from that, moving forward, just from the COVID element. And then you kind of have to figure, well, what's the recession going to do on top of that? That's a little bit of an unknown at the moment. But yes, it was a big uptick. It was really impressive.
It's kind of interesting. You called it a Zoom boom.
Zoom boom, yes.
I guess it's interesting because both Deneen and I are contributors on TV networks. Deneen's a Fox News contributor. I'm a contributor with Newsmax. So we look at our faces on TV. I guess a lot of the general population, that might have been something new and saying, oh my, look at me.
Mm-hmm. And you're generally not in a professional studio. So right. The lighting's not going to be good. And then the interesting thing, I've been working on a video post of this because it's, for some of the social platforms, is that depending on how you have the settings of your camera, as to whether or not it's in mirror mode or camera mode, you prefer the way you look in the mirror because that's what you're most used to seeing. So if your Zoom is set on camera mode, your face is going to be flipped. And it's generally going to be a little bit disconcerting to you.
Oh, the bad side showing.
Yes, the bad side's on the good side and the good side's on the bad side, and then both sides look bad.
So see, Deneen doesn't have that problem. Both her sides look good.
That's why she's on TV.
Tom. No, that's great. That's good to know. I had not heard that. That's
I hadn't heard that either. Mm-hmm. So we got two things we didn't know before. I like it.
It also works for your phone selfie, depending on your setting. It'll either automatically flip it or it won't, but most people don't even know they can change that setting.
I didn't know. So working on that now. Okay. So I'm just curious, what with my previous question, was there an uptick in men coming in, or was it mostly women, or kind of balanced? Like, what was that like?
It was pretty across the board. I think
Yeah.
so in 2019, right, the body procedures were kind of like 1 and 2, and then the facial procedures were like 3, 4, and 5. So it was like liposuction, breast augmentation, then rhinoplasty, blepharoplasty, and like facelifts in terms of hierarchy. The whole thing flipped in 2020 and 21, and all the facial procedures became 1, 2, and 3. And then other types of procedures got added in, like a lot of people came in for jawline recontouring. Like if you had a double chin, like you wanted that gone on your next Zoom. And so that did bring in a lot of men. And also the eye procedures brought in a lot of men. And so I think the male component did grow a little bit.
Well, that's
Interesting.
interesting.
It's strange how all the things happening in the world are affecting, plastic surgery.
Right.
Absolutely.
So the whole medical field, there's been, obviously a number of advancements, thank God, in terms of either vaccine development or cancer treatment. What are some of the new developments in the world of plastic surgery? Just sitting back and just watching ads on TV, people are familiar with Botox or fillers, and I guess now there's kind of a newer procedure, threads, where it's kind of, they call it a mini facelift. But from your practice, what have been the new procedures and developments that can really help patients and, hopefully at a lower cost?
Interestingly, one thing that did not happen in the last 2 years is that there really haven't been a lot of new technologies come out in the last 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic. So most of the things I'm going to mention are going to be 2 years or older. I think the only really new thing that's on the horizon is sort of that longer acting Botox. I don't know if you guys have heard about that.
No.
But rather than lasting 3 to 4 months, it's going to last 6 months. And the jury's still out on that particular product. But, that could be something that's exciting to a lot of people, just not having to go in to get the treatment quite as often. Other than that, I'd say everything else was kind of pre-pandemic. But I do think what's gone on in the last 10 years is that there's been a lot of advances in non-invasive technologies, whether it's lasers or radiofrequency heating devices or ultrasound devices, either targeting kind of like your skin in general or trying to tighten your skin or reduce fat. There's also been a great interest in a lot of muscle building procedures through electromagnetic stimulation, mainly for the body. But those things have come out in the last couple of years and are really nice treatments because they actually do tend to work, and they work nicely, and they're not surgery. So that's kind of been an area of growth for many years, but those technologies are only getting better and better. And so, one might assume that certain types of surgery in 10 or 15 years might not even really exist anymore or be very rare, which would be nice, sort of like a Star Trek kind of thing.
Bring on the phasers.
Yeah, where's Dr. Bones, whatever his name was?
Bones, that's right.
It was Bones, you're right.
It was Bones.
So how cautious or what kind of research should people do in terms of finding a good, credible plastic surgeon? I have read stories about people perhaps having bad outcomes, or the person was not qualified even though they advertised that they were. How can people determine where they should check out, what plastic surgeon they should check out?
I mean, it's hard. I think with the internet and the social media, people can put out a certain picture of who they are and mislead patients. I'd say, fortunately, I think that's a very small minority of practitioners. But from a patient standpoint, I think, you need to triangulate all of your information. right? You go and you look at the website, and you look at Google, and maybe for plastic surgery, there's a site called Real Self, which is, a lot of doctor and patient contributions. And so you can get some pretty good information, look at reviews, but realize, like reviews are just reviews. You're going to get polarized sides of that. So, they're either the best or the worst, right? So you want to take all that information, try and synthesize it into a picture. And then I think it's very important to take a time and say, well, what is this procedure and what's this person's training, right? So I did ear, nose, and throat and facial plastic surgery. And so I predominantly do just head and neck surgery, right? And so, if I was advertising myself as somebody doing like breast augmentation, well, that like wouldn't really make sense given my training unless I did some additional training. And so you should be able to kind of inquire about that, say, hey, this guy did an ophthalmology, residency, and, now he's doing, abdominal liposuction, like what's the training there? And they could have learned it and they could have been trained and been really good at it. But I do think you have to fact check a little bit. I think you have to be particularly careful when you're going to somebody that has their own operating room. So here's another fact you might not know. So if I go into the hospital makes me certify which procedures that I feel that I'm qualified for. And then the chairman of my department has to then sign off on those. And so if I book a procedure at the hospital that is not in my list of approved things, I have to show them training in order for them to allow me to do it. So there's a check and a balance. Now, somebody that owns their own operating room self-certifies. So there's no third party saying this guy is qualified or not qualified to do this procedure. So I think if you're having a procedure done in a private office, then I think you should really make sure that you're solid on the doctor's credentials and make sure he's in the right space. He or she is in the right space from a training standpoint to do this procedure for you.
Yeah, because I've often wondered, sometimes you see these websites and they're offering all sorts of services. I'm saying to myself, well, usually a specialist is really good in one area, and that's kind of where you'd want to go. To your point, you don't want someone doing breast implants or augmentation if they're really a facial plastic surgeon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, there's rules and there's exceptions to the rules.
Right.
But the exceptions don't change the rule, right? So,
True.
I do a procedure on the arms, for example, because I have been doing a procedure called Face Tight for about 8 years, which is a non-surgical tightening procedure. It works great on faces and necks, and you combine it with liposuction. And because I had the machine, I said, well, I think arms would work really well with this. And obviously the company has people doing this. And I went and I spent some time with some other physicians and watched them do these type of procedures. So I offer that in my practice for the last 5 years. So I have sort of gained that area of expertise. But I do think patients sometimes, want me to explain like why it is that I'm offering to do the arm procedure. And then I talk to them about it's very safe and, the anatomy is very simple and here's how we do it. And I've got a lot of experience with this machine and I've done, a couple hundred of these arm procedures. Here are some before and afters. And by the time, it's over, then they realize like I'm appropriately credentialed to do this.
Right.
So I do think that people can get areas outside their practice that they're proficient in, especially as they, get older and just gain more experience. So, there's nuance.
Right. So just so the audience knows, both audio and radio, that we have never met.
Mm-hmm.
But first time we're speaking. So I went to your website, and so did Deneen. And for me, two very, like 4-star check marks. The first is that you're still writing research articles and publishing. To me, that shows that you have a deep interest in carrying forward knowledge, and you also are teaching. which also shows that you have another interest in, advancing knowledge to the next generation of physicians, plastic surgeons. And I think anyone who's looking for any doctor, those are the sorts of things that I key into, because actually I have an undergraduate degree in microbiology and a master's and PhD in biochemistry. So then I went into politics. That's a whole other story. But to me, I have this kind of vision of looking at things like that, and to me it goes, check, check, this is really good. And finally, you're I guess in undergraduate or medical school, you're involved in research, in cellular research. So again, for a science nerd, that's kind of cool. But again, anyone that's showing, to me, a deeper knowledge set rather than just a practice, but then taking your practice out to the world, I think that's something that the individual citizen should look at in seeing or hiring any doctor to do any kind of procedure.
Well, I appreciate it. Very, very nice words. I think, teaching is wonderful. It's also, if you can teach, then you know, right?
Very true. Very true.
Then you don't know. So it keeps you honest, because you have to be able to explain things in the thought process to somebody else. And it also helps you to kind of synthesize your own thinking. So there's a give and a take in terms of positivity in that endeavor. And then same thing with research, that we all have our anecdotal thoughts and our, heuristics of how we see the world. And, eventually you want to know if the things that you're doing are real and they have a true effect, as opposed to just assuming that. So I think research is very nice. Also, within my field, there's a lot of opportunities for creativity. And so if I think I've developed something that's really an asset, I don't want to just keep that for myself.
Right.
I think it's an asset. I think everybody else should know about it. And maybe not everybody's going to develop that technique, but some people might. And I've benefited from other people doing that, and it's sort of a pay it forward.
Well, again, that is really, I mean, obviously a medical doctor, but that's true science, is advancing knowledge for all, rather than like, a pharmaceutical company, hey, I got this patent, I'm now going to milk the hell out of it so I can make a lot of money. So again, I think that's another aspect when people are looking at individual medical websites on how to pick a physician. Again, personally, I've had people ask me, I have a bad shoulder, a bad knee, can you help me find an orthopedic surgeon? And I remember I went into one website, it was actually a hospital specialty surgery, and one of the doctors' undergraduate degree was mechanical engineering. I said, all right, that's the one.
Yeah.
Because someone has a deep interest in the mechanics of it, of the way the muscles and the tendons, everything's work. The mechanical side, to me, that was, again, 4 stars. So you can do that sort of research as an individual.
Yeah, it's a little harder outside of an institution, but I come into contact with residents and fellows and fellowships, and with a little support, it makes it a lot easier to do it. And a lot of the research that we do is not really hardcore bench research. It's more kind of like
applied.
Exactly. It's case series and looking at outcomes. And it's not a high level of evidence. So the burden to be able to do that type of research and write a paper is not that high. But it's always nice to be able to work with somebody else on that, as opposed to just making it yourself. Like I write a book chapter, it's not as much fun as doing a paper with one of the residents. It's it's more enjoyable to do it with somebody else.
But also that's also time. Deneen and I now write commentaries. I used to write scientific papers. It's a lot of work, and teaching also takes a lot of time, because you have to prepare, then you have to take the time to deliver. So again, you're doing a lot more than just servicing your patients. And for that, I think that, you deserve a lot of credit for that.
Thank you.
Definitely. Well, this has been a great discussion, and we do hope you'll come back. But before we let you go, is there anything you wanted to mention that we have not covered?
I think we've been pretty broad. We've gone through a lot of topics.
Okay. And if you just mention your website.
Oh, sure. So my website is New Face NY or New Face New York, and actually across all the socials on TikTok, I do TikTok, and Instagram, it's New Face NY. So you can kind of find me by that anywhere.
Great. And again, you had a long look at Tom. You sure there's I don't know.
Well, I have a little thumbnail.
We'll call you.
Exactly.
me call-
Dr. Frankenstein.
Call out. Yeah.
I'm going to need the thing on the side of my head. Electrodes.
We'll give you a call.
Perfect.
So look, this was a great discussion. Thank you so much. You are the first of our Doctors series. So thanks so much for taking the time today. We do appreciate it.
Wonderful. Great talking to you guys, and I'd love to be on it.
Folks, that's it for Reigniting Liberty. And remember, everyone has a role to play. What are you doing for liberty? Until next time.